Hi, this is Steph, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, broadcasting from New Haven, Connecticut.
Baby, I'm here. You asked me to.
Happy Freedom and Democracy Day, everybody. It's the primary day, August 14th in New Haven, Connecticut, and we're going to be talking about that today. Welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines and the stories that make the Elm City tick. Well, it is primary day, as I mentioned, and a whole lot of names of Republicans and Democrats are on the ballot clamoring for your vote. What's it all about and what's at stake? Some of Connecticut's leading political minds are here in the WNHH studio to help us figure that out. Say good morning to Democratic State Rep Pat Dillon of New Haven, Republican former State Consumer Protection Chief Mark Schifrin, and Jonathan Wharton, until recently New Haven's Republican Town Chairman and probably the most popular Republican in the modern history of Democratic New Haven. Joining us by phone later this hour, we might be hearing from some other experts, but in this room alone, we probably have a good century of, more than a century of political knowledge and observation. And thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So, folks, today we have a lot of primaries. I think it's 4 on the Democratic side, 5 on the Republican side. That's a lot, the most I can remember in at least more than a decade. What's at stake? Why are so many people running, and what does this mean for Connecticut? What's at stake today at the polls? You can all jump in at once.
I always defer to the professor.
When you say 4,
Love it.
Like on the Democratic side, there are 4 constitutional officers.
That's what I meant, constitutional officers. I'm not talking.
Right.
I'm talking about statewide elections, and
Okay.
because a lot of the top jobs, except for the controller and except for the Secretary of State, the other 4 positions are all being vacated. After, in some cases, up Denise Napier, State Treasurer, was there for 4 terms, 16 years.
Right.
Those jobs don't open up a lot. There are a lot of baby boomers, like some of the ones in this room, who have had positions over the years, and it's very competitive every time they open up. But what does this mean for our state? Is this just about personalities, or is this about something about where Connecticut's going? What's at stake, Mark Schifrin?
I think you've got both. You have a situation where there are many people who see an opportunity, a generational change, particularly in the Democratic Party, but also in the Republican Party. I mean, we have a very serious candidate for lieutenant governor who's 31. We have a 58-year-old who is the party endorsed candidate for state treasurer, Thad Gray.
Is 58 young or old nowadays?
Well, it's interesting.
According to Bernie Sanders, the right age for president is in the 80s.
Well, the 58-year-old running is a guy who has a very significant Wall Street investment experience and left Wall Street to run for state treasurer. And his opponent is 29 years old and has been a long-term member of the legislature. So it's
very interesting.
You look at this.
How long-term can you be at 29 years old?
I think he started at 22.
Wow. So, Mark, where do you stand on that? I mean, you've been in Republican politics for decades, Mark Schifrin. Do you want people who have been in government who see how government works? Do you want people who have been outside government to see how business works, or does it depend on the job?
There are virtues of both. And in some things, when I looked at the treasurer race, I thought that the experience in managing pension funds and understanding the management of many billions of dollars is an important thing for that specialized job.
Gotcha. Now, Pat Dillon, you've been in elected office, state level since 1985, local level since the 70s. How do you feel in a year like this when in both parties You have all these people running who say, I can do better than those idiots who are in government because I've never been in government, and somehow that makes me more qualified to run government. What do you think about that?
I think it's really exciting, certainly as a Democrat anyway, and this doesn't have to be partisan, but in Congress, you've got this extraordinary exodus of Republicans. They're just jamming out those exits. And it's not clear to me why. There's a story there somehow, but it's definitely Republicans. And yet, in Connecticut at the state level, we've got a tremendous amount of talent out there that wants to get involved in the public sector. After all the negative things that have been said about government, we've got a lot of people who want to be involved.
Now, some of them are young.
None of them are going away after tonight.
So some of them have been
remembers.
like activists, sort of, or people who the kind of people who run for public office. Others, like a number of people running for governor in both parties, and Thad Jones, the treasurer, and Dita running for treasurer as the Democratic side, say, I know
Thad Gray, not Thad Jones.
I'm sorry. They're saying, Pat, though, that if you've been in government, that means you're no good at government. And if you've run a business or been in the financial industry, you understand better how to run government. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of friends on the street, and they would probably laugh at that notion. I think you have to say something, I guess, to make your own case. But
like Bob Stefanowski runs payday loans. Does he think someone who's never done payday loans is better at ripping off people and taking their cars away than someone who's done it?
Well, the most obvious.
That's a
really
little
oversimplified.
Oh, wait,
really isn't a fair characterization.
Jonathan Wharton. No, but
Stefanowski.
Jonathan, I was thinking about that. So if you've run a business that preys on poor people so that they get more loans and they can pay back, so then you can make serious interest on them and then take over their lives and put them in more trouble, might that be the right person for state government, which is in desperate financial straits?
You know, the characterization of Stefanowski is interesting. Because
I just got that from Bob Stemmerman, the guy running against him.
Well, there has been some negative campaigning between them.
Not in the Democratic side,
except for treasurer.
certainly
and lieutenant governor.
The interesting thing on Stefanowski in that was that he had really did have a background of cleaning up a bad business, and I would like to know more from him about what he did in cleaning that up. But I gather that he came in for investors in a bad business and basically fired most of the senior management.
And that's a story that equity funders often tell. We go in and save these bad businesses, but at least in the media industry, we see the story as much different. They go in and bottom feed where some business is falling apart. They extract the last bunch of profits while destroying the business and then close up shop. Right. We've seen that with newspapers all over the country, including the 2 bankruptcies, the New Haven Register, and what Gatehouse Media is doing now. Jonathan, how do you feel about your party being taken over, both parties, by hedge funders and equity funders?
I'm amazed by it, particularly because, let's face it, the majority of them are from Fairfield County. I made light of that on Twitter yesterday, and God knows I probably got 20 likes because of it. I mean, 6 out of 7 candidates, including even, obviously, the Democratic ticket. It is amazing geographically.
Because Fairfield County doesn't even consider itself part of Connecticut, really.
And one of the responses I got from somebody was, Danbury is not Fairfield.
Yeah. Until we start collecting taxes, then we get all our income taxes from Fairfield County.
Says that too.
Right, exactly. Right. Good point, Pat. But, it is kind of interesting to me. I mean, a lot of my students have asked me over and over again, since, I teach at Southern, state and local politics, why do we have so many candidates? Because even when we started out, remember, everybody, we were in the 20s. Well, we were 25, 26 candidates.
Yeah.
Or
for governor alone.
Yeah, for governor alone. And I think a part of it was, and maybe the representative can shine some light on this, is because of the public financing option. It led to having more people running for office on both sides of the aisle.
Although, Jonathan, neither of the 2 Democrats running for governor are taking public financing, and two of the 5 Republicans are not taking public financing.
Right.
I'm not disagreeing with your point that more people can run.
I'm saying in the beginning,
and
at
in
least.
the beginning, they all wanted that public financing. Ganim wanted it. He's running for governor in the Democratic side because
he sued,
which I think is one of the most bizarre rulings, that if you've been corrupt in the past, you can't get clean money financing because you've been corrupt. So therefore, you're kind of pushed back to hitting up all your contractors again while you're the mayor of a city. Pat, any thoughts on that? Unintended consequences of good liberal policies.
We don't know what we're doing sometimes. It sounds great. It's I don't know. I mean, I had to start a PAC when I was a new legislator.
Political Action Committee. Yeah.
A political action committee, because I had acquired an IBM clone. That's how long ago it was.
What's an RBM clone?
IBM.
Oh, IBM.
It was a leading edge or something like that.
Oh,
And-
computer. Okay.
And Jeff Garfield told me that I would have to sell it.
He was from the Election Enforcement
Elections
Commission.
enforcement, that I would have to sell it and return the donations pro rata because I couldn't
So interesting.
buy it. And I was like, I can't do that. And he said, well, you could start a PAC. So I did.
Mhm.
And now it's still
And
there.
now it's a dirty word.
legacy thing.
PACs were created by liberals after Watergate, saying this will clean up politics, and then they became some of the most nefarious funders, now hiding even the identities and super PACs of who's giving the money and subverting the whole idea of these reforms in the first place.
American Politics 101.
Well, I think people look at individual things in a vacuum. And also there are things that become sacred. I mean, what you were saying about maybe it's because the money, the mere whiff of the statement that there's any moral hazard involved with putting money on the table would make a lot of people very angry because they are very outraged at what they see as open.
Or maybe the lesson of
Grifting.
campaign financing
And so
is
I don't know how to phrase that. But
Right.
you may be right.
maybe
Unless
tr-
the
maybe
remedy would be to raise the threshold.
maybe traditional Republicans are right in saying that often when you try to fix a problem, you make it worse.
Well,
If you rush
that's
and do
sometimes the nature of the game, especially when you're dealing with laws, right? You always have to amend it and change it and find ways of adapting to it. And certainly the lawsuits that come aboard. I mean, the great thing, Paul, is you got a lawyer in the room, you have a representative here. I mean, they would know a lot about this in the sense of what you can try to do. And obviously in Connecticut, it was an experiment because of
Yeah.
what happened, obviously, in the past.
Well, did you notice when
I love that polite way a Republican says what happened in the past, not our governor went to jail twice, our Republican governor, because he stole money.
well in the
Which the Democrats do too. We got one running for governor.
I was about to say, I mean, among others. I was being diplomatic, Paul.
I was struck in Stemmerman's closing ad that it was very telling when he basically said that he had made his money and he didn't owe anybody, and there is a certain strength to that, both for
Donald
him
Trump.
and for Stemmerman.
For Stefanowski.
For Stemmerman and Stefanowski, they both are
Lamont.
largely self-funding, and there is an appeal to that. I was struck on Saturday when there was a PAC created to support Mayor Boughton,
Who was running on
and-
the Republican side, Danbury mayor.
Yeah, and the PAC had some funding by waste management interests, including someone who was convicted of racketeering.
And Patrick Sullivan, the leading lobbyist in Hartford.
Was Pat Sullivan one of the contributors to
The
that?
Fountain, he was tied to his PAC, Fountain's
Was
PAC.
that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Carol Hughes was too.
But anyway,
But
let's.
I spent some time doing that stuff and with recycling years ago. It was challenging.
What did you think when you saw about that PAC?
I'm not really in a position. I mean, I think a lot of stuff is going to come out, and I'd rather see what happens at 8:00 today before I weigh in on something like that.
Well, at 8:00 today, we're going to find out who is winning each of the 9 primaries we're having, Democrat and Republican primaries for statewide offices. It's a crazy year, and we're talking about that on Dateline New Haven with some of the sharpest political minds in Connecticut, Jonathan Wharton, Pat Dillon, and Mark Schifrin at 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Mark, you brought up an interesting point I want to pursue a little further. So one trend in American politics has been very rich people with no political experience in both parties running for office and saying, I don't need public money. I don't even need your money. I'm just going to try to buy this office, and you can trust me because I don't owe anyone. You have 2 people in Illinois in the governor's race now on both sides running each major party. In this race, we have both parties. We could very well end up with a Democrat who has spent $10 million on past campaigns and lost, and a Republican, either Bob, I always get the Bob and Dave mixed up, Dave Stemmerman and Bob Stefanowski, both very wealthy men.
They sound like a radio duo.
Or Steve Upsitnik. I mean, he's also.
I know, but he isn't self-funding.
Right. Oh, true.
But he's the business singer. But what I'm looking at is what Mark brought up. So is it true that the average person is better off with a really rich person who puts his own money in? Or is that just letting the rich buy government and have the income inequality get deeper and the problem of government being detached from popular interest? Again, this isn't a Democrat or Republican issue.
Well, let's go back to 1958 in New York State when Nelson Rockefeller was running against Governor Averell Harriman, beat him. And certainly there was these guys were both the financial elite of their Fair Day.
So we've seen this movie before.
We've seen this movie lots of times.
And yet they were sometimes different in those days. The Rockefeller family, pro or con, had such a history of public service. This was sort of like expected of you. Is that true of the hedge fund industry and equity industry?
They changed the course of a
Payday
highway
loans.
right near Pocono Hills because they didn't want to cut up their estate. And so they moved
Well,
the
then you're talking
highway
about
to go
government for
through
private interest.
a
So do we?
low-income area. I went to college in that area.
So you're talking about
So I
private
heard
versus
that
public
story.
interest. Is there a danger of government being removed from? Because it's appealing. You say, well, he doesn't have to make deals with unions. He doesn't make deal with conservative interest groups on abortion. They can just do what's right. But is that what happens, or is it just Is it just a version of what Pat just says, that government starts just being for the private interest of small
Well,
interest?
this-
Now we have to go through messy politics and getting your hands a little dirty so that everyone gets to have a say.
One thing, and this may be diversion, but there are many sources of political capital. You could have a famous name. You could have a father who is a partner in a very important firm. You could be part of a union that has representation all over the state, so that you could be a celebrity on a reality show.
That's right.
All of these things are political capital.
Let me ask the Republicans.
And so I think before we get into the money, because I think money is very important now, because the law has changed and we don't know where the money's coming from. But it's also true that there are other kinds of political capital that also skew the process, and maybe it's just the endowment you bring to the table when you run. I don't know.
Now,
that.
Connecticut's had a little bit of a different recent history with these self-funding millionaires.
That didn't do well.
So, like, in Illinois and Florida, they won. A lot of the Senate candidates won. And yet, in our last two statewide elections, every 4 years, the biggies, something interesting has happened. The last two governor races, Tom Foley put tens of millions of dollars into his own campaigns and lost to someone who was on public financing. The last two Senate races, Linda McMahon spent $50 million per race and lost. In the last contested Democratic gubernatorial election in 2010, Ned Lamont spent $10 million, 3 times as much as publicly financed Dan Malloy, and lost. Is Connecticut different? Do we not fall for the siren songs of "I'm rich, let me buy the government"?
I have read this over and over again in so many analysis, and the one thing that kind of stands out over and over again is that we're kind of the land of steady habits, is often the pitch, because we prefer our candidates to, going back to your point, having some kind of recognition, some kind of name, political capital. But at the same time, I think a lot of voters are concerned in terms of you're buying in to public office. I think there's this concern among many voters. Is that genuine enough? Is there a hidden agenda in terms of what you all are saying?
Or could it just be they were weak candidates, that when you buy your way on and get all those town committees to go with you, like the Democrats this year, they all went behind Ned Lamont, all these interest groups, the unions, all the elected officials. Not a single person I've ever spoken to is enthusiastic about Ned Lamont. He can't convince someone to buy an ice cream cone at a discount, let alone to vote for them, right?
Ned Lamont, you mean the grandson of J.P. Morgan's partner.
And yet he's the candidate because, John, and I'm not at all disagreeing with your point.
Right.
I'm just wondering if we're in a transitional year this year. The argument I heard over and over again that Ned Lamont promoted was that the Republicans are going to have so much money thrown into this race, you need someone with as much money to combat it, even though our last 4 major statewide elections saw the person who had the tens of millions of dollars lose. And in this campaign, again, he spent all this money on commercials that were complete duds. Joe Gannon, who has no money or organization, put the best commercials out there that I hear everybody talking about. I don't know if it's enough to win a primary. So why are people going, if Jonathan, if you and I are right that it hasn't made the difference, why does everyone this year, at least on the Democratic side, and we'll see today on the Republican side, believe that that's what you need, that you need the rich guy with tens of millions of dollars ready to roll to be competitive?
I think one factor that we need to consider in all this, too, is that, it is costly to run for office statewide. You need to get your name recognition out there. Campaign ads are not cheap. Getting together, a campaign machine is nearly impossible. It's costly. So you have that kind of built in with the person who's self-financing, at least. It's a benefit for some of these candidates. And so certainly on the Republican side, you see a lot of that. But it's not easy to run in a state like Connecticut, where we're sandwiched between Boston and New York. You have a media market, especially in Fairfield County, where you have to saturate it in New York media market, which is costly. You throw in how much money it costs even to try to get your name out there in a place like New Haven, and Hartford. It's not easy.
Well, we have on the phone, folks, someone who twice ran for governor and had to raise that money, Bill Curry. And he's been watching these campaigns closely, including an excellent article in Connecticut News Junkie yesterday. And, Bill, we're trying to figure out this question of why when Linda McMahon lost $50 million in each election and didn't win, Tom Foley spent all that money, self-financer, lost last two governor elections. Ned Lamont outspent Dan Malloy 3-1, lost his last election. Why are Democrats believing this year that the reason they have to go with a candidate who inspires no one is purely because he has a lot of money because he's rich?
Well, first of all, I'm not really sure that that's how they're thinking.
Oh, Bill, that's what everyone told me. They even said it out. Even Ned said it out loud. The Republicans are going to have all this money. You need me because I got the money.
Bill, we're thinking he inspires no one. The Republicans.
Yeah,
I have not said this morning anything about who inspires anyone.
That Ned has two advantages. He was born rich and not Ganem.
You're just talking about why the primary worked out that way. Obviously, Joe Ganem.
I know, but let me just add one thing, and that is that other candidates, good candidates like Jonathan Harris, had a tough time keeping with it. And I don't think that it was because everyone was tactically thinking that it was better to nominate the rich guy. I don't think that those were all the problems that the handful of other candidates faced. Many of the other candidates were tied to the Malloy administration, and deep down, Democrats understood that Malloy should have understood at least, that Malloy is 20% less popular in many districts here than Donald Trump.
Wow.
In blue Connecticut, Malloy's very unfavorables are higher than Donald Trump's. The entire party was tainted and painted with that. And so there were problematic candidates everywhere. Believe me, the problem of money in politics is something I care deeply about, and I do agree. And by the way, McMahon and Tom Foley each, they spent $1 kajillion on two races. They could have won. They both lost. I believe they both lost those races for the same reason, which they did almost no homework on issues. Their very expensive consultants told them all they needed were the right memes and slogans and ads. So they bought those and then did so horribly in debates that they lost narrow races. When they came out to do it again, they did the exact same thing all over again. They were no better prepared for their second races.
Well,
than they had been
Bill
for their
Curry,
first.
by the way, is the person we're talking to, former state controller, ran for governor twice as Democratic candidate. I know you love debates because you're good at debates. Do you think the debates really mattered as much as ads or forces on the ground?
It's a piece of like old, it's an old cliche that they don't, especially now. These debates, those debates and those races I talked about were all widely watched, and all those candidates, the losing candidates, fell after poor performances in each debate. And it's one of the things about money. I spend a great deal of my time studying public corruption. And having run twice and lost twice to a multiple felon, an odd distinction and humbling thought.
You also ran with one of the felons in one of those races.
Say what?
You also ran with one of the felons on your ticket in one of those races.
Yeah, and that's, and as I pointed out in one of those articles you liked, it was only because the convention that nominated him and rejected me gavelled the nominations closed before I could find someone to challenge him. And he then connived with Roland, even as he was running with me, covering all of his bets. I had a rueful laugh when he complained about Lamont not saying he could support him.
Pat Dillon, what do you think?
I won that primary.
What do you think about Bill Curry saying that it really is about debates and Democrats aren't behind Ned because of the money?
I would say that I think that there are a number of people who are insiders who feel personally comfortable with Ned.
You're talking about like the George Jepsons and the...
Well, George...
But why the AFL-CIO?
And he's a known brand who...
That kept losing.
Well,
Say what?
You're asking me...
What they're thinking, yeah.
I'm trying to answer your question,
So I shouldn't argue
Paul.
with you, yeah.
No, well, you can argue with me, but...
Sorry.
I understand that. But I'm trying to put forth some ideas about why they would, if we haven't necessarily stipulated that Ned Lamont is, everybody thinks he's horrible, because I think people have sold him short as a person. Now, as a candidate, I think he has some growth to do.
What about ability to run a government? no experience, no sense of knowing what's going on around him. No.
I do think there's a tendency to say, oh, any white guy that walks in has experience,
Mm-hmm.
and a woman doesn't have any experience
Mhm.
unless she has too much, and then she's threatening. But don't get me started on that. And that's bipartisan.
Feel free to get started, because look at this: the race in the lieutenant governor's race, we had Aaron Stewart, and tell me if I'm right about this: Bill Curry, John Wharton, Mark Schifrin, and Pat Dillon. I'm going to say he's an outsider, so I know a lot less than the four you know about politics. I looked at this race. I said,
"Oh yeah, right.
I said,
You're just a country lawyer."
He's just a poor old country lawyer.
Aaron Stewart was 31-year-old Republican who gets elected with Latino votes, city votes, works with unions. The biggest group of voters in the state is independents. Republicans haven't been winning statewide races for so long. How could they not have nominated that person for governor? How could they not have said, if we have a woman in this year when there's this anti-Trump feeling, a woman who can get us votes we never got before, who's of a new generation, why in the world wasn't she the gubernatorial candidate?
Two reasons, a couple of reasons. One, going back to my main point, there are an awful lot of candidates. So how do you break out from that? Anyone, let alone somebody like Aaron Stewart.
Maybe if you're the only one who's completely different from the others in a way that'll get you
You
votes.
have to find a way to stand out, and even then, especially among party loyalists. Two, and I think this is very critical that we tend to overlook, she entered in late in February. And quite frankly, even at the convention, the day before the nomination even took place for her to even run for LG. So, for lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
So the reality is that it was a matter of timing. It was a matter of a lot of candidates out there in the field. And so
Other
that's
people were
difficult.
committed.
Right. Very
Right.
good
Do
point.
you think
exactly.
she's going to win
Yeah.
lieutenant governor?
I think this is a very difficult race, the LG race. I know not too many people are focused on it or interested in it, but that's the one I'm most concerned about, is what is going to happen and what's the fallout going to be, because
In both parties, it's the most interesting race.
it's really, even on the Bicewitz and Zimmerman, that's
Yeah.
kind of intriguing too, on both sides too.
In both cases, you have a 31-year-old woman
Right.
who's representing
It's
a
a
new
generational
generation.
battle, Paul. Going back to what you
And
said.
also with policies of moving their party to a new group of voters who hadn't
Absolutely.
voted for them
That's
before.
right.
I mean, Bermuda Zimmerman, I see like the Ocasio-Cortez candidate in New York. What do you think, Mark Schifrin? Do you think that those two women can win today? And do you think they'll take their parties in new directions? And is that a good idea?
I think they both have the potential to win today. They're both also very young. And having spent some time in Hartford with a young governor, I remember that he ran when he was just about their age in 1990.
He had been in Congress, yeah.
And he had been in Congress. He had 4 years of congressional experience when he ran in 1990. And I think it's a tough argument that he would have been ready to serve in 1990.
And then he won in 94.
He won in 94. And one wonders if when people serve too young, they haven't acquired the maturity that occurs during life. They
I
see
wonder how this
different
conversation
things.
would be different if people were all half our age. What do you think, Pat Dillon, about these two women running for lieutenant governor and what it says about their campaigns? Now,
I
of course,
think it's
Eva's running against a
terrific.
woman from a different
It's
generation
terrific. And I do want to say about Alexandria's race that
in New York.
I know that she doesn't live in the South Bronx. She won, her district is Parkchester and Queens, and you know the Bronx, so which makes it even that more interesting. You know, people talk about it like she represents Joe Serrano's district. She saw an opening and she took it. In New York.
And it is the year of the woman
and no
everywhere,
one
but
ever
maybe
attacked her.
Connecticut. Yeah.
No one covered her, so she got no negatives.
Oh.
So she had kind of the Bernie effect.
Under the
where
radar.
She never, I don't know if she was under the radar. She did an extraordinary ad.
She did.
But
The heels were amazing.
But she didn't get mainstream coverage.
Mm.
And so you had a number of races in New York like that, and I think that could happen in Connecticut as
And
well.
DFA New Haven is tweeting Bill Curry on WNHH. Ganem is a felon who, quote, connived with John Rowland, close quote, while supposedly running on my ticket in 94. I think that was also the year where Rowland and Ganem, according to my buddy who worked for Ganem, were putting together a commercial originally where, no, I guess that was in 2002, where he was going to endorse, or was he already in jail then? He was going to endorse Rowland at the baseball arena. Bill Curry, do you have any memory of that?
They were I'm sorry. Do I have any what?
Memory of when Rowland and Ganem, I guess that was Ganem in jail yet in 2002? I guess not.
That didn't actually happen.
I know, but they had a whole
and Ganem
ad
was
where
not
one was
yet in
pitching
jail
the
in
ball to the
2002.
other. He had to run against you. So what do you think about the
but
two
they
women?
were, two peas in the same pod. Roland and Ganim are both examples of the fact that your political experience can teach you the wrong things.
So what do you think, Bill, about the two women?
People often are happy to see fresh faces.
Bill, the two women running for lieutenant governor, what do you think about that phenomenon as challengers?
I'm sorry, Paul, I couldn't hear you.
The two women running as challengers for lieutenant governor, what's your take on that?
I think that if the Republicans somehow find their way to nominating Stewart, along with either Boughton or Stemmerman, the Republicans have a very strong ticket. And on the Democratic side, what strikes me most is that in all of these races, even where there are purported change agents running, the races are coming down more to personality and the politics of biography, and that you couldn't ask for a clearer distinction than you see between Susan Bisowitz and Eva Bermudez Zimmerman on issues, and yet it will come down to Susan's personality and Eva's experience.
What is the difference between the two of them on issues as you see it? Because Susan's tried to run left.
You know, I get that, and for me, that's a take on her career, which I feel is, you know, that you don't get much closer to a permanent party fixture than Susan Bisowitz, and you don't get to be a much more vivid progressive than Eva Bermudez.
Alex Taubes writes in on Facebook. Foley came pretty close, to be fair, very fair, because he came almost won. But what some people say is he was running against the second or third most unpopular governor in the country. Alex Taubes also writes, young people can do the work, and a lot of people work without pay. For the party faithful, the notion of paid jobs being available because Ned Lamont's got resources might be attractive. So Alex thinks the party lined up behind him because he bought him, which happened in New Haven. The only the only people who have ever told me vote for Ned are people who are on Ned's payroll.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you go.
And but you,
well, then let me tell you to vote for him. First of all, the state, in my opinion, is in Connecticut and across the country, the overriding issue when you ask voters what they care about, which most of our pollsters don't do. The overriding issue is corruption in all of its forms. It's what Obama ran on at the end of his campaign. It's what Bernie ran on. It's what Trump. The Drain the Swamp ad was the only message he sent in the industrial Midwest. If you ask people in Connecticut, it's a much bigger part of Beloit's unpopularity than people recognize. And,
what is the corruption issue in Connecticut?
But we have a politics here, which is just in part. It's not just how we raise the money; it's how we spend it. These ads are also empty. The arguments are so empty. You look at the arguments in both parties. You know, how many bathrooms in a mansion? What's a sleazier business? Payday loans or hedge funds? And here's the state in such legitimate, genuine crisis. And so, you know, policy precedes message. First, you have to figure out what you believe, and then how to tell people about it. But the more money you spend in these races, they tend to be spent in the same kinds of consultants on both sides.
But what is the corruption issue?
Same kinds of mere biography ads. I'll be really interested to see. Everybody agrees in this state that the state government is in peril and that the economy is in peril. Most people agree that the democracy nationally is in peril. We've never had more primaries or more candidates or more money spent and less to be said about those issues. I'll bet it's reflected in the turnout today. I'll bet that despite all the races, all the money, all the candidates, and the severity of the issues, that it's lower than average. And at that point, everybody in the game ought to take a hard look at themselves.
Okay, let's remind people you're listening to Dateline New Haven on 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org, WNHH. Thanks for checking in, folks, on Facebook. We're talking to Bill Curry, former state controller and gubernatorial candidate and advisor to President Clinton. We're talking to former and current Southern professor and former city Republican town chairman Jonathan Wharton, Pat Dillon, New Haven State Representative, and Mark Schifrin, former state commissioner of Consumer Affairs and longtime active Republican.
Can I pick up on what Bill Curry offered there? One thing I think is that I am interested also in turnout as well. But one thing we need to keep in mind is that the party faithful, they have a tendency to show up. And so I'm interested in those numbers, but I'm especially interested in terms of what happened after the convention. You saw a lot of upheaval on even a lot of the other tickets, you know, where they wanted to continue running. Think about the attorney general race, right? On both sides. Think about even the comptroller's race. I mean, you know, it's no secret. I mean, I'm working for Kurt Miller, and, you know, it's kind of interesting to see that there is this interest in saying, okay, despite what happened at the convention, we're going to still have those same candidates run, despite, somebody else getting the endorsement. So seems like there's this interest to still run. Treasurer's race, too. I mean, that was very, very close.
And what's really
race.
interesting is that, unlike in the past, it's possible today the Republicans will be nominating a gubernatorial candidate who need even participate in the convention. Will be the first ever, if Stemmerman or Stefanowski
I've
win,
been saying that.
he'll be the first one ever to petition his way onto a ballot. Do parties and party conventions matter less than they used to?
A lot of the barriers have fallen. So we have a situation where the mediators that we used to have to get through to get ballot access, those mediating forces have less control. People can petition. Self-funders have a greater opportunity. Though in Connecticut, I mean, while Averell Harriman was governor of New York, Prescott Bush Sr., also from Brown Brothers Harriman, was senator from Connecticut. And while we have the talk about McMahon running and spending a lot of money, the person who beat her for the Senate is, I believe, the wealthiest or one of the wealthiest
but he didn't put
members of the Senate.
He didn't put that money into the campaign the same way.
You know something? I have to believe that the tremendous wealth of Dick Blumenthal it was certainly a factor, has certainly been a factor in his success. I mean, Dick is someone with tremendous privilege.
Andrea Thomas right in. Hello, she voted. Thank you, Andrea, for listening to the show. Pat Dillon, what have we lost and what have we gained without the corrupt backroom politics deciding who is the candidate?
Well, I was thinking of what Mark was saying, and if he's correct, then the Democrats actually were there earlier in terms of the mediators being bypassed.
After 74, the post-Watergate reforms, including the ones Bill Curry helped pass in Connecticut.
Bill Curry.
Yeah.
So he's on the line, I believe. So that's that. The old saying used to be Democrats want to fall in love and Republicans fall in line. So that even though there might be some tussles along the way, you assume that there's going to be a party line vote. I don't know with the Democrats what's lost. Well, you could find some of our weaknesses have been in marketing. Whatever you think of Donald Trump, he knows how to market. His ideas may be terrible, but whether it's the red hat, or you could even look at a debate as a very thoughtful exercise in policies. Or you could look at it as an opportunity to market yourself.
So tell me about
a couple of things.
Put yourself in the middle of the pack, be taller than everybody else, and dominate like he did.
But a couple additional factors come into play, too. I mean, don't forget, in Connecticut, we have an awful lot of independent unaffiliated voters. And so I think
over 800,000.
It's huge. A
lot more than Republicans or Democrats.
Right, exactly. Right. So we can't forget that. We are losing numbers. Both parties are losing numbers, especially among young people. I mean, God knows I had to convince a student one more time of why to affiliate with the party. They don't see a real need to participate in a primary, to be involved in a Republican or Democratic town committee. And in Connecticut, we have 160-something towns.
And I remember
how many
how hard you worked,
there?
Jonathan, getting people in the Republican town committee, which you did pretty well, but it was a hard job.
It was very hard. And there's a generation gap to that, too.
Bill Curry, why don't people want to sign up with parties anymore?
Well, I don't know entirely, but one really good reason would be that both parties are on the issues that matter most to the economic well-being of the broad American middle class, mortgaged to the same policy.
Oops. Sorry about that, Bill. I think you got usurped by somebody else on the line. Is that Vin Morrow?
It is.
Okay, Vin Morrow's the Democrat. I'm very sorry, Bill Curry.
He can always throw elbows with anyone. It's
you know, it's so funny.
This is a surprise guess is Vinny Morrow.
You know, it's so funny. I didn't do anything. Somehow, the way our phone system works, Vinny just knocked Bill Curry off the air.
Vinny can do that.
Nice.
Democrat problems.
I get accused of doing a lot of bad things. I don't want to knock Bill Curry off the ball.
This might be a generational issue.
It's a great conspiracy theory.
Vinny, you trying to get
I get accused of doing a lot of things. Sometimes I don't. I mean, it's not even me. But I don't want to be knocking Bill Curry off the ball.
I like it.
I think it's a baby. He didn't like baby boomers being in charge, and that was his real issue. Vin Morrow, you were on the Democratic Town Committee. We were just talking on this show, and thank you very much for calling in. Why are people banning the party? Why are there 850,000 plus Connecticut people who cannot vote today on primary day because they are the biggest group of voters in the state and they're not affiliating with the party? Why aren't you guys getting people to care about party anymore, and what does that mean for politics?
I mean, I think it's that's a subject where I know you got a lot of you got a few people in the room that can speak to this much more eloquently than I can. But I mean, for a long time, people got involved in parties because of the patronage issues, and that was the way to get a job and all these other things. I mean, those days are long gone. So
we can
now
get
it's about
contracts though, right?
substance, right? I mean, the substance part of this is trying to convince people to join a party. The first question is why? Why should we join a party? And the most important issue is to vote in primaries. I've got an uncle who refuses to register as a Democrat or Republican, and I always say to him, I'm like, you understand other people get to choose who you get to vote for, and I never understood that. I mean, primaries.
Vinny, in your
are,
family, I always thought someone else was there to choose who you would vote for.
Ooh.
Journalist Party writes that
No,
none
wait a
pictured will win. None of the picture people are running today, but thanks for that. Thanks for that. Who is going to win today? And does it matter? Like on the Republican side, 5 candidates. Two of them's last name begin with STE, and they both have never been in politics, and they're financing their own campaigns. I've heard it's a 4-way. Sitnik's not necessarily, except from Sitnik, the others pretty much tied. Is that how you guys are seeing it?
It certainly seems like a jump ball. The candidates seem to be close to one another, and I should say the self-funding. I've spent time with all of these candidates. I've watched them in the debates, and the self-funding candidates have taken a lot of time to get up to speed on issues and have evidenced a lot of substance. Tim Herbst and Mark Boughton are very substantive. They've been in this for a long time.
Well,
and Steve Sitnik is also a very
Am I right
very
that what's happened the last few weeks
guy.
is that Mark Boughton had the advantage because he was best known, he was the party endorsed, he's been in government, but that he slipped a little bit by embracing this whole phase out of the income tax that isn't realistic, and that in the last few weeks, David Stemmerman has gotten some traction, as has Tim Herbst in the last few days.
I think the advantage had strongly been for Stefanowski, and when
Stefanowski, he got it because he had ads up early, so he was showing his name.
I think Stefanowski's advertising and early campaigning helped him. I think when Stemmerman started doing heavy negative ads, those certainly hurt Stefanowski and narrowed the margin. And Stemmerman did a lot of positive communication as well that I think helped him. The number 2 position had probably been held all along by Boughton. I don't know how much the negative campaigning on Boughton has hurt him, and he certainly looks competitive in this. Tim Herbst seems to have picked up to where he
and
would
he's
be
going for the
competitive.
Trump base. How much is the Republican Party a Trump party in Connecticut?
Depends on which part of the state. I mean, if you look at places like on the eastern side of the state and the Valley, that could be very significant. And somebody like Herbst, who's got the support of CCDL and other gun rights organizations, it does help at least foster a base. And so that could be key for somebody like him. And plus, let's face it, Boughton and Herbst have run for statewide offices before. So again, we're going back to that name recognition factor, the representative's main point about political capital. So for both those candidates, that stands out. For the other candidates, for the business leaders, businessmen, clearly they're the antithesis. And so they stand out for that reason.
To an automatic voice message system.
I don't know why that's happening. Harry Droz, our producer, why is that? I can't get rid of that on our feed.
Please record your.
All right, thanks a lot for that. Our phones are going crazy today.
Does that mean that Bill Curry bumped Vinnie Morrow?
Yeah, I was about to say, is he coming back on now?
So this is a fight between the regulars and the reformers?
Welcome, yeah.
Hello,
Democrat
is that
Party,
Vinny
right?
still on the line, or is that Bill? Okay, we lost them.
Maybe
both.
Marty
That's okay.
Dunleavy got rid of both of them.
Sorry about that.
He could elbow anyone out.
But we do have
That's real
people
reform.
live in the studio at Dateline, New Haven, WNHH FM, your home for community radio, 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenpennington.org. Now, how important are commercials, folks? In primaries, we're told that traditionally they come down to who has the best ground game, who has the most people working with passionate, because there's a lower number of voters. Or is this about who has the best commercials? How are modern campaigns working, Pat Dillon? Like, you don't do commercials when you run for state rep, obviously.
No, I don't, and I don't do enough of almost anything now that I see how much people are doing. But and I really should change that. But I would say, like today, the turnout was light, but I did see a Republican coming to vote in the Republican primary.
We do exist in New Haven.
They definitely exist in my district. Whether they turn out to vote today, we'll see. There probably are in some other districts as well. Not my district, but the 92nd. What I think I know that the first ad that Ned Lamont did not help him. That people criticize.
Driving in a car he didn't own, where he doesn't look at the camera and says, "I'm a regular guy." And I haven't met a single black person in New Haven who's voting for Ned Lamont, who isn't paid by Ned Lamont. And I can't believe how many African Americans I've talked to who vote for Joe Gannon. They said he deserves a second chance. And
I know a few actually up at
almost,
Southern who actually are. Yeah, who are actually very supportive of
And what
Ned
do they
Lamont.
say?
I spoke to somebody this morning who is not on Gannon's payroll.
Okay.
But because there isn't much of it, actually.
Right.
And
well, that's the thing. Joe Gannon doesn't have money. I haven't seen evidence of a vote polling organization. All he's got is ads and weak support for Lamont. Does he break 35%?
I don't. I mean, who knows? I mean, believe me, I have never seen an election with so many different variables. So that stick your neck out. I just would say, though, that Gannon had more support than I expected.
What about you, Vinnie Morrow?
I think that as we went forward, though, that people started thinking more of electability, so that may have gone away. I don't know that.
Vin Morrow and Democrats have united behind Ned Lamont, elected Democrats in New Haven. That happened in 2010, and yet he lost New Haven. How do you see today? Oh, I guess we lost him. Or are you on Billy Curry? Okay, one of them knocked the other one off. Sorry about that. What do you think? What do you think?
We Republicans can't get that done, so this is really something.
And
this is New Haven, though.
And then who's the most electable? One thing we always heard is that in primaries, the base pulls the candidates to the right or the left, but then the parties try to come to the center in the general election. So often the person who isn't your strongest general election candidate is the one who wins in primaries. But that kind of conventional wisdom has been called into question, especially by the 2016 presidential election, where people felt that you couldn't look in left, right to talk about where the base was, that the same people wanted Bernie Sanders, wanted Donald Trump because they were upset about a different set of issues. What do you think about that?
Well, I do think the definition of left and right is getting a little complicated, but it might have to do with emphasis. There's no question. I don't. When you talked about where the support is versus where the ground game is, I don't see the Gannon operation having the ground forces to take advantage of what. And it was all overwhelmingly men that made a point of telling me that they were supporting Gannon.
However, I will add in there.
I've heard from plenty of women who are for Gannon.
But I have to say, I mean,
I'm volunteered, not my yes.
But the strength with Joe Gannon, I think, is that, and this has always been his element. He's great at retail politics. He's good at door knocking. He's got the presence around in various places. He connects and resonates with so many different types of voters. It's quite stunning to see.
And he got a
that.
chance to do that because the Democratic convention denied him automatic place in the ballot, so he had to get tens of thousands of people to sign petitions.
Let alone
Vin
public
Morrow,
financing.
are you on the line?
Yeah, I can tell you, Joe Gannon's one of the best retail politicians I've ever seen in my life.
How much is that going to matter in a statewide gubernatorial primary? What are you seeing, Vin Morrow? Do you see a movement on the ground for Gannon? Is it going to be a wipeout in New Haven? How do you see it?
You know, I don't think you'll see a wipeout. You know, what I think you see is, you know, the more interesting number is going to be the statewide number. Right? You know, and then where do the Gannon votes come? If the Gannon votes come out of, you know, Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven, then you know then he connected with the urban vote. The bigger question is going to be where do the Gannon votes come from when you take a look at the map, and are they protest votes for Ned Lamont? I mean, if people are going in there and voting for Joe Gannon.
All right. So, but you know, I was also thinking what that means for November, because Lamont is going to. You can't win a statewide. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. You can't win a statewide. A Democrat can't win statewide without a big turnout in New Haven, like 18,000 margin. That's what got Lamont. I mean, that's got Malloy over. It's a good guy.
That's right.
What got Murphy over?
Dan Malloy won his first election with 6,600 votes, and the biggest vote came from New Haven.
In
That's
both
right.
elections. And he had an 18,000 vote margin in New
the
Haven.
second time Danbury flipped, and I guess we won't discuss that here.
There's a reason why New Haven has 100 delegates after all. You have the convention.
Right,
I mean, this
right.
is significant. You know,
Bridgeport also. Bridgeport was a major factor in both of Malloy's wins.
And definitely, certainly on the Obama, coming
Absolutely.
in a number of times. So,
And I don't see that for the Democrats this year if Ganim is not the nominee.
it makes you curious about what's going to happen in November if
I
Ned
haven't
Lamont
got a clue,
gets that
but
nomination.
I don't
How many people
think-
turn out?
Particularly if Stemmerman or Herbst are the Republican nominees, I see Bridgeport as very much in the game.
I think Ned Lamont is a lot more tenacious as a person than people are. I think there's a style substance issue going on. That if you come out and you say, "Oh, I'm combative," you could fold later, but people remember that you're doing that.
Can you name anything Ned Lamont said that's a policy position that's interesting, different, inspiring?
I would say that there are a number of things that he's done. For one thing, he keeps coming back. I mean, what makes
So
him
does Joe
tick
Ganim.
is a whole. I know he does.
But Lamont is like a pudding. There is nothing to him. He seems to stand for nothing other than the prospect that the grandson of J.P. Morgan's partner is ready to serve.
What do you think about that, Pat Dillon?
I think that's unfair.
Vin Morrow, stand up for your man.
Vinny, go ahead.
That's just an unfair characterization.
Tell us what he's done.
Vin?
Not a hell of a lot.
Wait, we
unfortunately.
gotta let Vin answer the question.
To point to a policy that he's done, but I mean, I think that's an unfair characterization of a guy who keeps running, and he's doing it for the right reasons. I mean, look,
Our Harold
I introduced
Stassen,
him the
wonderful.
other day. I introduced him the other day at a rally. I mean, and I was fully honest. I mean, I have never supported the guy before. I supported Lieberman last time, and I supported Malloy. I mean, but to say he's never done anything is just, that's just an unfair characterization.
We're running
of a
out of
guy.
town. And by the way,
what
Vin,
I said to him is, here's what I think about Ned Lamont. He has the right moral compass for the job, and you know what? Sometimes you got to take that faith.
okay, guys and women who are here in the studio and online, and Vin Morrow, thank you for your tenacity and staying on the line in that fight with Bill Curry for access to the show. Running out of time. Any predictions today? Any surprise? Who's going to win the Republican primary? Any other surprises on the ticket?
Somebody from Fairfield County will win. The governor's race.
Someone rich will win.
Paul, back to your point about you got all these unregistered people. I mean, if someone can win the Republican primary today with 30% of the vote, I mean, that's dangerous. I mean, if we're not going to have open primaries, have move these primaries up so you can have runoff.
Okay, Lucas Gabriello, what worries me as a Democrat like Ned Lamont is he's a Democratic version of Donald Trump from his campaign ad. As a businessman, Edward Three-Fifths, the donkey and the elephant, symbols of the two dominant political parties, are tied at the hip. It is now time to put the donkey and the elephant on a raft and push them out to sea. Mark Schiffer and Pat Dillon, any parting predictions?
Ooh.
I don't have any predictions except that there is life after 8 o'clock tonight. And most of the people who ran are not going anywhere, so I hope we can pull this together.
All right, and Mark Schifrin.
We're going to see.
Last word is yours.
I think we're going to see a Republican win in November because this state is in terrible shape.
And which is the Republican who had best chance of winning in November, and why?
I think it really, we've got a jump ball here, and I tend to think that the greatest odds for a Republican win in November would be one of the outsiders.
Name one.
Stemmerman or Stefanowski.
All right, so it's going to be STE. Stemmer's guy with last name beginning with STE. We're going to learn his name in the fall.
I think that's the likelihood.
All right, thanks for joining us today. Thanks to the great panel of guests, Pat Dillon, Mark Schifrin, Jonathan Wharton, and then Bill Curry and Vin Morrow, arm wrestling on the, no, more than arm wrestling, mat wrestling to stay on the phone here. Please remember to vote, and thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group's CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.